Okay, Chevra. So, Be'ezras Hashem, what we're going to be continuing with tonight is our second shir in the series of shirim on the laughter of Yitzchak. And I apologize if the audio is a little bit off. I'm just in a different room where there's more of an echo. But one thing that I wanted to start with, which I briefly touched upon last week, was the title Sloik the Yitzchak. And to the best of my knowledge, I had not seen that language anywhere explicitly, which was not a problem, but Adrabah, you want to find it in the Tzaddikim. The Rebbe used the Lashon in, I forget which Shal Shudas Drasha last year, where he brought down the Lashon of Sloik the Yitzchak as well. But then I was like to find in Or HaTorah from the Tzemach Tzedek in Parshas Vayera, for the Tzemach Tzedek, and this is really going to be the starting point of what we're going to try and discuss tonight with regards to Yitzchak, which is the possibility of the impossible or the impossibility of possibility. Now, the two ways of framing that are significant to some. You know, there's many thinkers from elsewhere that spend a lot of time discussing the nature of Misa, the nature of death, in their perspective as whether it is the possibility of impossibility, meaning it's living with the reality of something that is impossible to comprehend, that it can emerge at some point. So it's the possibility of experiencing something impossible, or versus the other camp, which said it's the impossibility of possibility, meaning that that moment of Misa is the end of all possibility. So I'm not being so medayik in which lashon we're using, but what we're going to see with Yitzchak is that it's a possibility that emerges specifically out of the impossible, which therefore shows us that the impossible is possible. And so to start off, we'll see this Tzemach Tzedek, which Baruch Hashem brings down this Makor. And like I said, we're going to spend more time in Osios during these classes to show where the Torah of the Tzaddikim is going to and coming from. So in Medrash Rabbah and Parshas Emor, it says that Yitzchak Avinu is the highest of all avos. Yitzchak ikra tukva di Yitzchak. In the Zohar Kadosh, it's referred to as the strength of Yitzchak. Tushbechasa da avon. It's the most praiseworthy of the fathers. And the Tzemach Tzedek continues to ask. He says, but that's seemingly strange because Avram Avinu, we can understand this chesed and rachamim and compassion and loving kindness. Yaakov Avinu, the Bechir Sheba Avos, the one who is moilid, the 12 Shvatim. Like we saw, there's clearly a categorization of Avram and Yaakov on one side and Yitzchak on the other, like we saw from the Gemara in Shabbos last week. And so the Tzemach Tzedek says, so why is it that Yitzchak is going to be identified as the Tushbechasa da Avon, the highest of all of the Avos, to the extent, like we saw from the Gemara, that in the future it's not going to be Avram Avinu or Yaakov Avinu who help us get towards redemption, past that seemingly impossibility of redemption. It's specifically going to be Yitzchak who leads us there, to the extent that we're going to say about Yitzchak, Ki ata Avinu, so you are a father, because specifically through the midah of Yitzchak within ourselves, we're going to be Zoichet Geula. So Zak Tzemach Tzedek, Ella Yesh Lomar, we can try and understand why Yitzchak is identified as the top, because in the future we're going to say, like Chazal tell us, that Yitzchak, you are our father, which means to say, based on what the Arizal describes, that in the future that which appears to be severe and concealed is in truth going to be revealed to be the birthplace of expression, and that in truth, Bina, like we described as being rooted in Yitzchak, Kol Hashameya Yitzchak Li, anybody who hears is going to laugh, hearing that Tzaddikim say is associated with Bina, Ani Bina Li Gevura. So like we said, that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov can be compared to Chachma, Bina, and Das, Yitzchak being Bina, which is the birthplace of severity within the self. So we see that Yitzchak Avinu represents this eventual elevation of that which appears to be concealed over what we assume to be higher, and that's expressed in the ascendancy of Bina in the future, where we say Eishes Chayla Teres Baila. So we can say, says the Tzemach Tzedek, that's why we identify Yitzchak as the Rosh of the Avos, because it's the transformation of that which appears to be difficult, of that which appears to be concealed, of that which appears to be rooted in the difficulty of experience and the concealment of existence, and in truth, that's going to be revealed to be the highest. And the Tzemach Tzedek continues, and he says that this is the inyan of the futures. This is the inyan of the laughter of Yitzchak. The laughter of Yitzchak emerges from what? It emerges from the transformation of that which appears to be destitute and concealing and difficult and hard and frightening and scary and all of the synonyms that we associate with Yitzchak. In truth, that's going to be the birthplace of revelation. That's going to be the birthplace of laughter. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, Be'ezras Hashem. Because what we're learning in the Parshios and what we're seeing in front of our eyes in Kriyas Torah is that there is a real awareness of the impossibility of Yitzchak Avinu's emergence into this world prior to his emergence into this world. That Sarah's reaction and Abraham's reaction on a certain level, very different, but not quite completely separate, is that the reaction with laughter towards the fact that Hashem says that Yitzchak is going to be born to you in your old age is a laughter of impossibility. It's not a nihilistic laughter that negates value, but it's a laughter of negation. It's a laughter that says, no, this is impossible. Almost a scoffing at the fact that this possibility is being offered to me, but I know in truth that this possibility is impossible. It's not something that can happen. It's not in accordance with the reality that I live in. It's not in accordance with the frameworks and the measurements and the rules and the certainties that I encounter my day-to-day experience with. So you're telling me something is possible. I'm saying it's impossible. And the laughter is at the very possibility of the impossible becoming possible. That's the birthplace of laughter in this context. The birthplace of laughter and the eventual naming of Yitzchak to be identified with this experience of laughter is the emergence of the possibility of that which I know and feel deeply to be impossible becoming a possibility. It's a surprise. You're telling me that what I thought was impossible is possible. I couldn't have believed that to be possible a second ago, but now you suddenly break open and you crack up the screen and you reveal that there's in fact a possibility of this impossibility. So the reaction is laughter. Now that laughter can sometimes come by way of negating that possibility. No, it's not possible, it's impossible, and allowing the impossibility to prevent me from opening myself up to possibility. But on the other hand, the laughter can also be an affirmative laughter in the sense that a laughter is the response to the fact that nothing makes sense anyway. Nothing makes sense anyway. The fact that the possible is possible doesn't make sense. So why can't it be that the impossible should also become possible? Sarah Imenu seems, as we understand from the Meforshim, to have responded to the declaration that the impossible is now possible with not a scoff, but a negation. It's impossible for that to happen. And the laughter is at the impossibility of the impossible becoming possible. But Avram Avinu's laughter was an affirmative laughter in the sense that I know that everything is random and I know that everything is run directly by your hashgacha Ribbon Shloim on every level. And that which appears to be certain and possible is only because you've decided to make that possible, which means that the impossible is not something that is ontologically and in reality impossible, but rather it's impossible because I haven't deemed it as possible yet. But through the laughter of affirmation, which is cracking up at the fact that, mamish, I have no idea about anything. I have no idea what's possible, what's impossible. I know nothing. I don't know the difference between teva and nes anymore. At that point, the laughter is an affirmative laughter that declares the possibility of the impossible. This is what the Sfas Emes describes in describing why it is that Sarah seems to be taken to task for her laughter, while Avraham is not taken to task for his laughter, but rather is celebrated for his laughter. Because the midah of laughter, the midah of negation, a nihilistic laughter, the laughter of Zarathustra, lahavdil, that's described by secular philosophers in Nietzsche's writing. Zarathustra is this laughter of the wild man that comes down to negate all value, the Philistinian laughter, right? The laughter of negation, of nihilistic approach to life. There's no value whatsoever. And laughter is identified as something that very often is associated with the negation of human experience, with falling into disarray and chaos as we see throughout Sefer Bereshis. That laughter is associated with a levity and a nihilistic approach to there being absolutely no value. And therefore, laughter is b'derech klal seen as a negation, a devaluing of something, a saying that things are meaningless. And so laughter is something that was already stuck in the lower parts of the self, where when I'm laughing, it's a negation of laughter. A laughter is in the face of, this is not possible, and I'm not going to try, and it's hopeless, etc., etc. It's dark, and therefore the only thing is to laugh at anybody who comes along and says something is possible. Sarah Imenu seems to have still remained stuck, not stuck, but still trying to rectify the negation of laughter, the laughter that says that things are not possible. It wasn't a nihilism. It wasn't saying nothing is valuable. It was saying that according to my understanding, this seems to be impossible and it can't happen. The change cannot take place. I can't do that thing. I can't become X, Y, or Z. And what Avram Avinu did was he rectified it. He took laughter, and not only did he not fall into the negation of all value, but he affirmed value. Avram Avinu said, you know what? The randomness, the absurdity of all things, the absurdity, and Avram Avinu understands that this is going to be the hakdama necessary for the akeda, where he's going to come face to face with the absurdity of it, where he's going to come face to face with the delicate boundary of the yes and the no. And Avram Avinu is capable of affirming laughter, of saying, no, v'tischak li'om acharo. There's going to be a laughter here that's not negative of value or order, but it's a negation that brings me to the place of pure emunah. This is why the Tzemach Tzedek continues that it's specifically within Bina, that place of Yitzchak Avinu, of severity, of difficulty, of failure, of falling, that we're going to be able to reveal the highest lights imaginable of La'asad Lavo. That the lights of La'asad Lavo, the lights of Keser, the lights of Or Ein Sof, which is the gematria of Slok, as Rav Yitzchak Morgenstern points out in the name of the Tzemach Tzedek, that the deepest revelation of all, the true essence of the Rebbeinu Shalom being expressed as it is in this very moment, in the bareness of reality, of that which is, of kacha, of this is how it is, of keser kol aksarim, the hakar of leis asar panamine. There's nothing outside of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Possible, impossible, it makes no difference. It's all the Rebbeinu Shalom. That gilui, that or of La'asad Lavo only gets drawn down by the midah of Yitzchak, which means that what we see with regards to the emergence of Yitzchak is that it comes from a place of recognizing at first glance that this is something impossible. There's a yayush. Hope, like we spoke about in the Shirim on hope, kivui, the yearning towards something is the recognition that even though something is not present right now, even though that it appears that in this moment in my life, I can't do that thing, I can't accomplish that thing that I'm trying to accomplish, I can't take that next step, I can't change this midah, I can't change this thought pattern, I can't change this ingrained trait. So when a person is hopeless, it's because there's no possibility for the circumstances that keep me in that situation to change. And when a person finds themselves in a dark place, in whatever type of space they find themselves in the moments of Yitzchak Avinu, in the choshech of the Laila, in that world of Yitzchak Avinu that at first glance appeared to be devoid of the light of Chesed and Rachamim, so it's very easy for a person to be yayush. It's very easy for a person to say, there's no possibility for a shift here. Whether it's because of me or not, there's no possibility. That's the hopelessness. That's the yayush that precedes the revelation of Yitzchak. The emergence of the possibility of that which I thought was impossible. The impossible taking place. Sorry, Imenu, having a child when she knows that it's an impossibility. When she knows that it's an impossibility according to her perception of possible and impossible. To emerge out of that hopelessness, to emerge out of that yayush, and to suddenly realize that, wow, all of the boundaries and the rules and the bifurcations and the separation between what I conceive as possible and impossible, hope and hopeless, light and darkness, is mamish, has nothing to do with me. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got everything to do with the Rebbeinu Shalom. And at that point, when the impossible becomes possible, there's a gilui of tikva, of hope from within hopelessness. There's a bracha that comes after a he'edar. There's an effulgence, a fullness, an expression, a moment of yeshus, a moment of yeshus ha'amiti, of presence, of calmness, of emunah, of tainug in emunah. A moment where a person can lean into life and say, I believe in the Rebbeinu Shalom. I believe that all of it is rooted in the ultimate good. And in this moment, I am okay. There's a presence that saturates all things. That's the birthplace. That's the birthplace of Yitzchak Avinu. And so it's only out of that yayush. Now, in Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, somebody who we said last week is very makusher to the world of Yitzchak Avinu. According to the Talmidim, according to Rav Avram ben Rav Nachman, the Bir Halikutim, the entire inyan of Rabbi Nachman is the Slik the Yitzchak. The entire inyan of Rabbi Nachman is Bina, is the world of separation, revealing a deeper light of unity, of Atik that's Meskala in Bina. The entire world of Rabbi Nachman is a world of Yitzchak. And we see that when Rabbi Nachman tries to travel to Eretz Yisrael, prior to getting to Eretz Yisrael, he says that in order to get to the godless of Eretz Yisrael, in order to get to the true heights of spiritual experience, of living life as it truly is in this moment with the light of Emunah, the godless of godless, a person has to first and foremost go through the katnas of katnas. A person can only go to that greatness by way of smallness within smallness, of hopelessness within hopelessness, of a double darkness, an experience of being in the Beten Hanachash, as the Rashash writes. And when Rabbi Nachman descended into that place that he descended into for the sake of coming to the godless of Eretz Yisrael, and we know the story, Baruch Hashem, we know the story from Rabbi Nosson, who defines the story. My brother, Rabbi Josh Rosenfeld, gave a series of shiurim on this trip of Rabbi Nachman, the spiritual experience and the reality of Rabbi Nachman going down into those low places for the sake of coming to Eretz Yisrael. They're very valuable shiurim. They really bring a person along the journey. And when Rabbi Nachman hid himself and concealed himself in that place and allowed himself to be enveloped within that self-made darkness that he had to descend into for the sake of Gadlus Shebegadlus of Eretz Yisrael, he wanted to go by the name of Yitzchak. He said, Yitzchak is the best name that you can call me. Yitzchak is the best name that you can call me. He was messing around with everybody. He was laughing with everybody. He was making slick out of everything. He was pretending to be one thing when not being the other thing. He was sending voices and echoes. He was living the experience of Yitzchak Avinu. And there was a chassid who came to Rabbi Nosson, and the chassid had a problem. He wanted to name his child who had been born after Rabbi Nachman. But at the same point, he had a Saba whose name was Yitzchak, so he didn't know who to be Machabed. And what Rabbi Nosson answered was that you should name him Yitzchak because by naming him Yitzchak, you're Makayim Shneim. It's Yitzchak and Nachman, and if you do Nachman, it's only Nachman. So we see that Rabbi Nachman is part of that world of Yitzchak Avinu, and Rabbi Nachman says, Asur lehit yayush. Asur lehit yayush. A person can never fall into hopelessness. A person can never allow themselves to fall into despair, because in the moment when a person lives the Yitzchak within themselves, or lives in a world of Yitzchak, and the generation of Yitzchak, which the Ramak says we live in the Shemitah of Yitzchak. Everything is about Yitzchak. We live in a universe of Yitzchak, because it's the universe of Geula, and we know that Geula is tied up with Yitzchak, and therefore we live in a universe, in the epoch of Yitzchak. Beforehand was the epoch of Avram Avinu, that was Mayim b'Mayim, the waters of Chasadim. Now we live in a place of Tohu and Tikkun, of Yitzchak Avinu experience. Rabbi Nachman says that Asur lehit yayush, a person cannot lose hope. It's forbidden to lose hope. It's forbidden to give in to the possibility that something is impossible. You're not allowed to admit to the fact that something is impossible, because impossibility is something that is only dependent on your mindset. Again, in accordance with the status that a person has in that moment. The next step is what appears to be impossible. The next step out of our vision, what we don't conceive as possible, that's what is not impossible. That a person can always inch themselves ever slowly but surely forward, inch after inch, half an inch, in imperceptible movements of growth. Rabbi Nachman says that impossibility is an impossibility. There's no such thing as impossible. But then Rabbi Nachman changes, and we've spoken about this a little bit in the past, that instead of saying Asur lehit yayush, it's forbidden to give up hope, which implies the possibility of hopelessness, but rather it's a prohibition, because you don't prohibit something that's not possible. So when Rabbi Nachman says Asur lehit yayush, it's forbidden to give up hope, the implication is that it's possible, but you shouldn't do it. Then Rabbi Nachman changes and uses a different turn of phrase, which is Ein shum yesh ba'olam klal. There's no such thing as hopelessness in this world, which is very different than saying Asur lehit yayush. Asur lehit yayush tells me that it's a possibility to lose hope. It's a possibility that things are impossible, mamish. I'm just not allowed to admit it. And it transitions us to a place of Ein shum yesh ba'olam klal, which is saying that even when you experience yayush, even when you experience the impossible, it's still not impossible. The first level of Asur lehit yayush is don't admit that things can be impossible. Always believe that they're possible. But then what happens when a person falls into a place of impossibility, when a person falls into that place of choshech, of their be'eros, of the wells that they dig being covered over, of the openings being closed, of the yayush-inducing process that people go through, sometimes on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience on one hand. So what happens when a person falls into those places of yayush? What happens when yayush does take place? When a person is transgressive of that prohibition of asur lehit yayush, and you know what, Nebuch, the person falls into yayush. So then Rabbi Nachman comes along and adds a different mitzias. It's a different halacha in yayush. The halacha here is that no, the emes, there's no such thing as yayush. Impossibility does not exist, because the possible and the impossible are both within the purview and the hands of the infinite light of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Leis asar panaminei. Leis asar panaminei. And therefore, all of our human conceptions of what is possible and impossible are in truth simply from the perspective of our human experience. But at that level, at the bottom, where a person has lost all hope, when a person falls into yayush, what they come to realize is that mamish, my conceptions are totally flawed. I know absolutely nothing whatsoever. And Rabbanu Shalom, you're here with me below, just as you were there with me above. When I'm ascending and when I'm descending, when I'm running and I'm returning. And at that moment, I come to realize that the binaries and the bifurcations between what I conceive as possible and impossible in my individual, subjective, psychological, lived experience of Avodas Hashem, between me and myself, between me and my loved ones, and between me and the Rabbanu Shalom, nothing is impossible. I can always move forward. And it's only when I come in contact with that yayush, when I come in contact with that prohibited space, and I break through the barriers of asur lehit yesh, and I find myself, when I fall into the place that I've fallen into, when the wells have been covered over, in that place I now have the opportunity of realizing that even yayush is not yayush. There's no such thing as yayush. There's always hope. There's always possibility, even if everything points to the fact that it's impossible. And Yitzchak Avinu comes from this place. Yitzchak Avinu comes from this place. And the Bal HaSulam writes in a letter, the Bal HaSulam was also very makusher to the world of Yitzchak. The Bal HaSulam's yahrzeit is on Yom Kippur, which is the Zman of Bina. The Bal HaSulam is all makusher to the Aliyah and the Yerida, of going up and down the ladder. The hidden knowledge that Yitzchak had, that in truth Yosef was still alive, but he was unable to tell that to Yaakov. Because Yitzchak understood possibility, impossibility, it makes no difference. Yaakov's avodah was to come to realize that there is a distinction between possibility and impossibility. Yosef is gone and he's not here. Yitzchak understood that no, even when Yosef is gone, Yosef is still here. Even when the bris is gone, the bris is still there. And the Bal HaSulam's entire inyan is bina, is kalim, is utilizing the kalim that we have, our gevuros, our limitations, our Yitzchak moments, and not fighting them, but transforming them. Fine, I have to receive something in this world. I'm begging. I'm a beggar in this world. I'm a meshulach in this world. You can't tell me not to desire and to yearn for things. So the Bal HaSulam comes and says is that mamish, you're still going to yearn for things, but yearn for them for the sake of sharing them. Yearn for them for the sake of giving them to somebody else. Be a bab merachim. It's be makabel amanas lahashpia instead of receiving for the sake of receiving. And the Bal HaSulam says that there's no zman yoter meusher mehayesh atzma. That at certain points, there's no valuable sight in spiritual, psychological life as valuable as yayush, as valuable as coming to that place where it's impossible. Where it's impossible, I can't go forward. I can't move forward, I can't move backwards, I can't move to the right, I can't move to the left. It's a bein hamitzarim. And in that moment, when a person hits that point of yayush, and they come to realize that ein shum yayush ba'olam klal, at that moment, the mahapech, the deepest chayshach into the deepest light, which is the strike of Yitzchak Avinu, of realizing that even the impossible is possible. And there's no zman yoter ma'ushar for the individual than that point of yayush. The Rebbe Rashab says this as well in Hemshech Samach Vav on Daf Kuf Beis. I'm not going to read it inside because there's one makor that we'll read inside today, but we've spoken about this makor before, where the Rebbe Rashab points out that the lashon of chikui, of waiting, of anticipation, of desire, is rooted in tikva, is rooted in hope, but it's a hope that's born out of yayush. It's a hope that is born out of the loss of hope. It's a hope that comes out of the impossibility. It's born out of that place where I have lost all hope. And now all I can do is desire the absolute everything of everything, the Rabbanu Shalom. Avi v'imi azavuni, those things that I thought I had have left me, my considerations, my assumptions, my knowledge, that's left me. Hashem ya'aspeni, and Hashem picks me up at that point. And it's only through that yayush that the tikva is niskala. It's only through that yayush that the tikva is niskala, and that's the mitzvah of Yitzchak Avinu. And what I want to look at is a teaching from the Beis Yaakov of Ishbitz. And after the Beis Yaakov of Ishbitz, we'll take a look at a teaching from Rabbi Nachman, which will bring us back to what we're trying to get to, Be'ezras Hashem. Now, the Beis Yaakov and Tzaddikim of Ishbitz obviously are very, very much makusher to the world of Yitzchak Avinu. The whole light of the Meshilach, the whole light of that place comes from that same place of Bina, which is me, which is Mei Shiloach Mem and Yud, which is the Nun Shari Bina, which is the Shirish of Yitzchak Avinu, which is the Shirish of Slok, because that's a place where what I thought I knew is revealed to be absolute ignorance, and I know absolutely nothing, and all I can do is laugh at the impossible becoming possible and the possible becoming impossible. And so what we find in the Meshiloach, and because the architect on a certain level of Ishbitz and Radzin is the Soid Yesharim himself, because he was compiling the teachings, so we see a hamshacha on a certain level between the gradations of the teachings of Ishbitz and Radzin. What you find in the Meshiloach, you will find in the Beis Yaakov, and you will certainly find in the Soid Yesharim. Now, Ora Wiskin-Helper, in her book about the Beis Yaakov, makes a very clear and valid point, which is that there's a difference between the Meshiloach, the first generation, the Soid Yesharim, the third generation, and the Beis Yaakov, the second generation, in terms of the development of the teachings and how the teachings were given over. But you see much more of an affinity between the Torah of the Meshiloach and the Torah of the Soid Yesharim, the Balat Cheles, than you find in the Beis Yaakov. But be'emes, what it is, it's Tohu, Tikkun, and Tohu. That prior to tikkun and rectification, we live in a world of chaos. On a certain level, the Torah of the Meshiloach is a Torah of tohu. It's a Torah of transforming everything we thought we knew about things. Then after we are decentered enough, then we learn the Torah of the Beis Yaakov, which is a ground, right? Beis Yaakov is learning, is studying, a mahalach hadavarim. And then after that tikkun, that rectification, which we conceive of as higher, we then come to the Soid Yesharim, which is really the inyan of Oiris de Tohu B'Kelim de Tikkun. It's the light of Tohu, but within the vessels of receptivity in a healthy way, where it's the intense, powerful, potent teachings, life-saving teachings of the Meshiloach, but brought into the Hamshacha and the Giluyim, or Mesudar and order of the Beis Yaakov. So the Beis Yaakov on Bereishis says as follows, and this is on the pasuk V'tischak Sarah B'kirba. So it's about the schoik. It's about the schoik of Sarah, her reaction to the possibility of the impossible taking place. And I'm going to read just a few pieces. I'm going to paraphrase some of the Torah. It's a very lengthy Torah. But what the Beis Yaakov says is as follows, that from the aspect that from her perspective and his perspective, there was absolutely no reason to hope for any type of salvation, they didn't even have the desire to pray for it. They didn't even have the thought to ask for it. It wasn't that I don't think I deserve it. It was that it's an impossibility. It was absent from their perception of what the world was, what the limitations and the boundaries of what it means to live in existence, to be in this world meant. Just as it won't arise within the heart of the individual to daven for something that has passed away to be revived, for that which is dead to come back to life. Why? Because from the human perspective, from our limited grasp and our psychologically lived experience of spirituality in this world, there's no room for this. It doesn't fit within the rules of reality. And even though we believe that in the future things will transition and we believe that the dead will be revived, that's only from the side of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because he can do whatever he wants. But when the individual is trying to psychologically conceive of what is possible in this world, this is the absolute opposition to what I think is possible, and I live with that hopelessness. But in truth, the salvation that comes about afterwards, the salvation that comes about when a person specifically thought that it was hopeless, is very different than the salvation and the redemption that comes about when I had hope for something. When I have hope for something, when there's room for me to conceive of spiritual progression, of psychological progression, of movement in my life. So that Giloy, that revelation in my life is something that emerges from above to below. It's referred to as Or Yashar, a light that descends directly from above to below. I'm looking towards the source. I'm looking towards Hashem. I know it's a possibility. Through my actions, I can draw it down. Through my hope, I can draw it down. That's when I have room in my worldview that this transition, this fixing can take place. But when a person finds themselves in dire straits of impossibility where I can't move forward, I can't move backwards, I can't change, I've tried and I can't, I've tried and I can't, I've tried and I can't. At that point, we're not even looking upwards to the source to desire that light to descend. Now it's coming from below. It's coming from that very low place, that rock bottom experience of yayush, where the Giloy comes from below to above, something referred to as Or Choser, a reverberating light. The direct descending light that comes from above to below, it doesn't have any preventions in the face of it. It's smooth sailing. The reverberating light happens when that descending light hits a limit. There's some mania, there's some yayush, and what we thought was the end of it actually becomes the centrifugal force that forces that hopelessness back into hope with an even deeper ferocity and intensity. That the limit level that descending salvation and hope hits in the moment of hopelessness is what propels us into an even deeper hope, the hope within hopelessness. The klal gadol that Rabbi Nachman Yitzchak teaches us, which is that ein shum yayush ba'olam klal, it doesn't exist. And this salvation, the rectification that comes about from this place beyond the human capacity of comprehension, beyond what I expected to be possible, that's a much greater revelation of godliness. That's much greater receiving of bracha than something that was possible to begin with. Because there needs to be a tremendous concealment in the world prior to the emergence of Yitzchak. And that concealment was that his parents had lost absolute hope in the possibility of him, to the extent that there was absolutely no room to hope whatsoever, because the aspect of Yitzchak is the aspect of Zriya, of planting, and planting is emunah, like Chazal tell us. Why? Because I take something and I kill it, I destroy it. I let go of it, I let it away from my grasp, I implant it into the ground, I'm no longer in charge of it. My rules and regulations of power and powerlessness, of control and lack of control, of possible and impossibility are no longer in my hands. Zriya is an act of hopelessness. It's a last-ditch effort to let go of something and to hope beyond hope that it will take shape in the proper way. The midah of Yitzchak is vayizra Yitzchak, and Yitzchak planted. He gave everything over to Hashem. He says, Hashem, possible, impossible, I don't know anymore. I know absolutely nothing. I don't desire anything but this moment with you. As the Meshilach teaches us that Yitzchak's emergence into the world is the sudden revelation of the fact that Hashem is everything. Prior to Yitzchak, we thought that Hakol bidei Shamayim chutz me'yira Shamayim, that everything is in the hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu except for the human being's experience of Hashem in this world, that it's up to us, that we're responsible to find Hashem, to be connected to Hashem. The revelation of Yitzchak, says the Meshiloach, and what the Beis Yaakov is hinting to here, is that in truth, Yitzchak Avinu is the revelation that Hakol bidei Shamayim afilu yira Shamayim. Even yira Shamayim is in the hands of Hashem. The way we comprehend the Rebbeinu Shalom is directly from the Rebbeinu Shalom. This is the secret of Simsum, that the Simsum is a revelation of Hashem, as we're going to see from Rabbi Nachman. This is the Giloy, and for that, Sarah had to laugh. It's impossible to live that way. It's impossible to live with that and still be a Baal Bechira. But the world of Yitzchak is to tolerate the paradox of it all, like we said. Yitzchak is a paradox. It's Bechira and Yediyah at once, as the tzaddikim from the Beis Medrash of the Gra described by the akeda. The akeda is the revelation that Yediyah and Bechira, foreknowledge and free will, operate in a paradoxical, mutual, sustaining dance of one another. And the midah of Yitzchak is to bring this recognition into the world that even our relationship with Hashem, even Yirat Shamayim, even our volitional way of living with the light of Hashem in our lives comes from Hashem himself. This is the secret of Yitzchak, to recognize this explicitly, that everything exists within the purview of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And if the infinite light of the Rebbeinu Shalom, if Hashem Yisparach decides that something is going to work and something is not going to work, then it's just what Hashem decides. And even Tchias HaMesim is associated with Yitzchak for this reason. It's in the bracha of Gevura. It's in M'chayim Mesim Ata Gibor Lo'olam Hashem. Because that light of Yitzchak is the revelation that something always remains. There's an infinite hope that exists at the heart of hopelessness itself. This redemption of the self in this moment is the secret of Yitzchak, whose aspect is to recognize that everything is in the hands of Hashem, and that in truth it's only up to Hashem to give me the ability. And that's why in the future it's only going to be Yitzchak who gives us the ability to find that redemption, to find that geula, to laugh with him. This impossibility of what we thought was taking place, what is not taking place, the Sodi Sharm explains as well in Sukkos and Ois Tzabi Beis, that laughter, as we're going to see, emerges upon something that was completely lost from the mind. I had absolutely no hope whatsoever that this is something that would take place. And it's specifically the redemption that comes from that place, which is referred to as Yitzchak. Now, this revelation of something new, as we're going to see in future shirim about the Lev Yasan, and we're going to descend into the teachings of Chabad Lubavitch in terms of understanding the sight of Yitzchak and laughter in the self very much. What I want to end with tonight is something that Rabbi Nachman talks about in Torah Samach Daled. And Torah Samach Daled is a Torah we're going to be living with throughout the shirim on Yitzchak Avinu, because Torah Samach Daled is the Torah of Simsum. And as we saw, Yitzchak is the Torah of Simsum. Yitzchak is impossibility being possible, creation being possible, Prior to the Simsum, creation was impossible. All there was infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was no room for anything. The secret of Simsum is that Hashem can make the impossible possible, which is that the infinite can manifest itself also in finite limitation. The secret of Simsum is the deepest joke in the world. It's the deepest light of Yitzhak Avinu, because in the future, when Mashiach Tzidkenu comes, we're going to undo the Simsum, and we're going to realize that the yayush itself is the highest revelation. It's the Malchus of Gnuz Barada, like Rav Aaron Halevi Meister Celia says in Parshas Toldos, in Avodas Halevi, that the reason that Yitzchak loves Esav, as we're going to see, is because Yitzchak understands that the yayush itself is the deepest revelation of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The secret of Simsum, the joke of Simsum, the doubling of Simsum, the ha-ha of Simsum, that prevention and progression, and the progression and prevention at once, the paradox of it all, is Simsum, it's Tzam-Same. It's Yud-K, and Atbash. It's a doubling of itself, which is the ha-ha. When I have to look twice, it's the Re'ei Ra'inu of Yitzchak Avinu, like we saw last week in the name of Simcha Bunim, that you have to look twice. And Rabbi Nachman doesn't say that Simsum is literal. Rabbi Nachman doesn't say that Simsum is figurative. Rabbi Nachman says that Simsum is a paradox which bridges the gap between two possibilities at the very same moment, with each side perpetually upholding the existence of the other side in an infinite gradational dance that gives birth to the deepest light imaginable. That's the secret of the Simsum. That's the secret of the Hilul, of the Hallel that emerges out of the Chilul, out of the Halal. The secret of life within death itself, the secret of Ketz Chai, which is the Osios of Yitzchak, which is the revelation of life within death. And when Rabbi Nachman is discussing this Simsum, he says it's an impossible place to look into, etc., etc. But in describing the Simsum, Rabbi Nachman is talking about Hinani Meimbi Arve Bigvulecha. It's talking about the pasuk of Paro and the Yam is the shorish of Simsum, and for some reason the Torah of Simsum is connected to the fact that there's going to be arba, there's going to be the locust in your gvul. And we're not going to go fully into this, but what the tzaddikim describe is that the secret of the tzimtzum is the secret of the locust. Kahadein kamsa de levusha mineyube, like that grasshopper, that locust whose exoskeleton emerges from within itself, where the shell, the covering, is part of the very thing it's coming to cover. The paradox between He'elem and Giloy and He'elem, of concealment and revelation of concealment, of the Simsum being a Giloy, of Yitzchak being the birthplace of hope, of absence being the birthplace of laughter, of Golus being the birthplace of redemption, of darkness being the very site of life. That place of Yitzchak Avinu, that Sfoik, that revaluation, that Or of Purim, that Venahapachu, that gives birth to that Sfoik of Yitzchak, to the Giloy of the Or Ein Sof. This Kahadein Kamsa de Levusha Mineyube, this locust whose exoskeleton emerges outside of itself, which is the secret how the concealment is part of the revelation, and the absence is part of the presence. And what is this Arba? What is this locust, which teaches us about Simsum? It's in the Arba et Zarecha, that's told over to Yitzchak, that I'm going to give forth blessing by you. I'm going to multiply, I'm going to reveal even more by way of concealment. And this is why Arba, Aleph Resh, Beis, Hey, is the gematria of Yitzchak. Because the entire inyan of the Simsum is the inyan of Yitzchak. And we're going to see next week, God willing, how this applies to the very secret of the fact that even Bechira, even the possible is rooted in impossible, and even the impossible is rooted in the possible. That place of laughing at the fact that the impossible is possible. And this Arba, this light of Yitzchak, this concealment that emerges outside of itself, that gives birth to laughter when we come to realize that the greatest concealment was in truth the greatest site of revelation, and that the stuckness in our lives was in truth the place of motivation. It's a secret that my experience of Hashem is coming from Hashem as well. L'cha amar libi bikshu panai. Hashem, my heart is telling me to cry out to you. The secret of Hisboidedus, where my words become Ruach HaKodesh, as Rabbi Nachman says. Where I speak to you through myself, and you speak to me through myself. Where I come to realize that I myself, as the limitation of existence, is in truth rooted in the infinite light of the Rebbeinu Shalom. And this sentiment that in truth even the deepest desires of the self emerge from the Rebbeinu Shalom himself, the secret of Yitzchak, of realizing that afilu Yira Shemayim is biyad Hashem, that even my comprehension of Hashem comes straight from him, that I have nothing possible, impossible, I have nothing. This is referred to in Eob as the secret of Achein Ruachu Be'enosh. It turns out that in truth there is a spirit in the heart of man. It's at the end of Eov's friends responding to him, and then Eov trying to respond and waiting for Eov's response, for him to stop complaining about the Yitzchak moments in life. So his friends say to him, Achen ruachu be'enosh. It turns out that there's a spirit that moves within man. And Rashi and the Malbim point out there that what it means is that in truth, the thoughts of man come from the Rebbeinu Shalom. Achen ruachu be'enosh v'nishmat shaddai tavineim. There's a spirit that moves in man, and it's in truth the spirit of godliness that they're understanding. And Rabbi Nachman says this paradox of realizing that the deepest emotional experiences that I have of desire to connect to Hashem out of the hopelessness are in fact coming from Hashem. And the concealment is in fact part and parcel of the revelation. Achein ruachu be'enosh, says Rabbi Nachman, is Rosh Tevos Arba. It's the Rosh Tevos of Arba, that secret of the Simsum, of Haden Kamsa de Levushim in Eyubei, that locust whose exoskeleton emerges from within itself, where the concealment is in truth a revelation, where the hopelessness itself gives birth to hope, where the impossibility becomes possible, and we learn that we can move ever so slightly forward by laughing, by moving ourselves ever so slightly forward, by laughing with our feet, laughing with our hands, laughing with every part of ourselves, when we realize that what we think is impossible is mamish possible when we let go of it all.